Well, today is all about land and making the right decisions. Now, we talked the other day about the off-grid property and how, the size land that we were buying, the acreage we were buying, what we were buying, cut over, pasture, all that. Well, today we're going to talk about the mistakes people make when purchasing land. Land is supposed to be an investment, something to give to your children, legacy, also to give you freedoms and liberties to do what you want to do. However, if you don't do your research and you don't buy it correctly or know what you're purchasing and go through all the right steps, guess what? It can be a nightmare. Let's jump into it today. What mistakes you should not make when purchasing land and things to be looking for. That way you know you're buying paradise, an investment, and a legacy, not a nightmare. Let's jump into it. Today's video starts right now. Hey guys, welcome to the Max. It is a cool, chilly morning here in South Mississippi. Look at the frost. We're going to be talking about the off-grid property and talking about purchasing land. We're sitting on about 40 acres now. This is my homestead, but we just bought another 15 acres to be a bug out or side project to build an off-grid cabin and be able to live sustainable there too. So it's important to know what your focus is on the land. Today we're going to be talking about some mistakes that most people make and their land becomes not a dream, it becomes a nightmare. And things if you're not paying attention to, you'll miss. Remember, the people selling you the land, they're selling it for a reason. And also the point is they're a salesman. So they're going to tell you all the great things. Let's don't miss out on the bad things or the things that we should just know about. It may not be bad to us, but it's something we need to bring attention to. But before we do, if you're new to the channel, go down here, press subscribe, ring the bell, give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down, but let us know what you think about this content channel. Our goal is to try to bring you as much information, help you and your family navigate the crazy world we live in. Number one, don't rush the decision. A lot of people, when they make up their mind, they say we're ready to purchase land. Well, remember, again, we're walking, we're going, we're looking, and we're either going to Zillow or Realtor.com or either walking with a friend, and all of a sudden we see this land and we just believe it's got everything that we could want. We look at it on the shallow side of it and say, well, this is what we got to have, let's buy it. When we're not patient, we can walk into lands that have a lot of roadblocks. So you have to make sure to be patient and know what you're looking for. So before you start looking for land, you need to know exactly what your plans are on the land. That way you're not going to bite off more than you can chew. That way you're not jumping into something that you're not ready for, and that way you know what you're purchasing, the pros and the cons. For instance, if you're buying it for livestock, you don't need a pine thicket. Number two, if you are buying it for growing vegetation, you don't need a rocky hill or a red clay mountain. They look cool, but you're not going to grow anything on it. If you're buying hunting land, then you sure don't need a pasture like you see behind me. You have a plan to know what you're wanting to purchase and don't just buy the first thing that you see. My goal in buying land, I looked at several places, especially even when you're looking for a homestead, off-grid cabin, or just a simple home to buy. Be patient. At least look at 3 to 5 options so that way you can balance them against themselves. If you have nothing to compare it to, then you're automatically going to think this is the property for you. Do not do that. Learn to compare maybe 3 to 5 properties. Write down the pros and cons of that property. That way you're not rushing into a decision. Let this be a dream, not a nightmare. Number 2, location, location, location. Now you hear that all the time. But how close or far is the nearest school? How close or far is the nearest hospital? How close or how far is the nearest town? Now, depending on what you're buying it for, like we talked about number 1, number 2 will answer itself. If you're looking to go off-grid, get away from the world, try to do everything sustainable, the last thing you want to be is close to all those things that we just listed. However, if you're purchasing this for a homestead, a sustainable way of living, but you still want the conveniences of town, then you don't need to buy one 100 miles away from the nearest town. Now, another thing to think about, when you talk about location, you've got to get there. So if you're buying something, make sure you have ways to navigate to get to it. If it is crazy terrain and you love it in the spring, can you access it in the winter? So location is key, not because you don't like the location or you love the location. It's the fact that you got to make sure that you can access it. When we were looking at property, we bought property years and years ago in East Tennessee. Now we don't have that property anymore, but when we were buying it, we were going up there in a 2-wheel drive vehicle and just looking around because we were in our van with our children. The guy that was showing us the property never talked about the disclosure of, well, on the sides of these mountains, you may need a 4-wheel drive, for half the year. Well, that's something that we should know, because that location may have been beautiful in July, but what about December? So location is key in making sure you understand how to get to that location. Don't make the mistake of just, I can always access it. No, have a plan and have a goal. Number 3, we addressed this in the last video. Easements. Now you're purchasing this land. Do you know, does it have any easements? I want you to look right there. I don't know if you can see it. There's a big line, an energy line running right there. Now that's the edge of one side of our property. I hate it. I hate having an easement even close to me. It makes me furious, because there's the random people that's going to travel that pipeline, and even though I've got gates, even though I've got fence up, that means they're close enough to my property, and I don't like it. Now when I bought my secondary property, I want to make sure that there's no easements running through it. So when you look at property, along with the plan, along with the location, not rushing in the decision, is there a gas easement on it? Is there an oil easement on it? Is there a pipeline on it? Is there energy line on it? Is there water rights on it? You need to know those things and make sure you understand what the previous owner put there. I was looking at another piece of property for a gentleman the other day, and he had a 5G tower on his property. Now he did put it there, the previous owner did, and they didn't have the tower there. They just had the rights to build, and he didn't know it. So his dream became a nightmare. So make sure you know easements for sure. Number 4, survey. Survey is so important. Don't trust fencing. Don't trust the realtor because he's trying to make a commission, and don't trust the seller because he's trying to sell the land. Survey your land. If the land is not surveyed, you don't buy the land before you survey it. We talked about this with the off-grid property. I want to know exactly where my line is, down to the little nook and cranny, every little corner. Now, if the surveyor messes up, I can't help that, but he is a licensed land surveyor for the county, city, or wherever you're purchasing. You want to know your property. There was a property that we looked at, and basically the road that was going to it looked like it was a road that went straight into the property. Looked like it was all bought. When the survey came out, about 10 foot of one piece of that road was not into that property. Guess what? You had to have a permanent easement from the owner of the other land, or you had to purchase it, or you were just kind of crap out of luck there. Know your property description by getting a survey. It is worth it. I told you I spent $1,800 on a survey of 15 acres. That was probably the $1,800 well spent before I bought it. You may not agree with that, but don't buy the land if you're not willing to invest in it and understand your property exactly where it's at. Don't follow some 1905 fencing or the previous owner there, because you never know what may have happened. Get a survey. Number 5, restrictions. Is there restrictions on the land that you're purchasing? So you need to look at the county, look at the city that you're purchasing the land in, and make sure there's no restrictions, no HOAs, no how you build things. If you're buying this land to build a homestead and live sustainable, if they can't allow cows, pigs, and chickens, then that's probably not the property for you. If you are buying land to hunt, but it's kind of in an ordinance where it's considered a residential zone, even though you're buying 20 or 30 acres or 5 or 10 acres, you can't hunt it because of the restrictions. If you're buying land and it's considered industrial and commercial, then you're going to be paying more taxes for it. So understand the zoning of your land and make sure it's not close enough to where it's going to be rezoned in just about 2 or 3 years after you bought it, and you've got 30 or 40 years to pay for it. Understand zoning ordinances and making sure you know exactly where you're purchasing to see if I want to farm, or I want to do whatever on this land, or I don't want to have building codes and have an inspector come. I want to get out of that area. So back to location, it needs to be, let's make this decision wisely based on what we're wanting, but also if there's zoning requirements, I don't know if I want to live here. Number 6, you better know some neighbors. I love the people that I'm close to because I learned them. I know them. I like, for instance, here I have a church on one side and then like nothing on the other sides. On my off-grid property, same thing. I know exactly who owns the land around me. So if you find a quote-unquote perfect piece of land, why don't you find out who the neighbors are? You can look at a public record and survey to see exactly who is around you. If you don't know them, why don't you get to know them? Because if they're half crazy, or they're a drug lord, or they're a gangster, that might not be where you want to raise your family. Don't just trust your realtor. Don't just trust the person that's selling it. Remember, pro tip, if the person is selling it, it's not a perfect piece of property. So when you go and say, oh, this is perfect, If it was so perfect, he wouldn't be selling it. So there's a reason he's selling it, and it may be just the fact that his life has changed and he's moving. Neighbors is a big deal. That goes back to kind of the survey. If you start doing things on your property and you have a neighbor who sprays heavily, or you have a neighbor who hunts crazily, if you have a neighbor who has 20 dogs, if you have a neighbor who has 150 cows but he doesn't have fencing, all that matters. So make sure you know who the neighbors are, and that will help you make wise decisions on land. If you make a mistake and buy this land and all of a sudden there's a gangster that lives beside you, or a mobber, a crazy redneck, you never know. It could be a problem for you, and not a dream, but a nightmare. Number 7, know your utilities. So kind of going along with, you know, the easements, for instance, if you're building off-grid like we were, I could care less about any utilities because I'm going to put all the utilities I'm needing based in the off-grid property living off the land. So if you're living off the land, you have to have a pond, lake, creek, water catchment, or well. Know those laws, know those policies of putting a pond in, water catchment, because there's some states that will not allow you to catch water, which is completely illegal, but I digress. That's for another video. So you have to know your utilities. If you're planning on building a home, like my homestead here, and you have to have electricity, you have to have a water, or if you're going to do a well, you need to know how to get those utilities there. If you're moving into this land and you're, miles off the road, just remember it may cost you thousands of dollars to get energy or utilities brought in. If you're off-grid, it doesn't matter, but you again know the ordinances to say I can, take this creek and make a pond out of it. I can catch water, I can stop this creek and make a ravine. You need to know those policies and know that you either get the utilities, or if you don't need them, no big deal. Another thing, when I was in East Tennessee, here in South Mississippi, I built a well, and the well was like, I was hitting water at 12 foot, but it went 125 foot deep. When I was in East Tennessee, we bought a property. It had to go in the ground like thousands of feet because we were on the side of a mountain. So therefore, when we were there to build a well, it wasn't 3,000 or 4,000, it was 10,000 to 20,000. So don't forget to count the cost of the utilities, because that's a big deal. And lastly, don't buy more than you can afford. Land is supposed to be a dream, not a nightmare. I've said that through this whole video. Don't bite off more than you can chew. If you're looking for 5 acres, buy 5 acres. If you can get a good deal on 10, great. But don't overbuy just because you get excited. Understand what you're purchasing, because you want to be able to afford it, pay for it, get it done, and be thankful that you've got it. We own the property here. The off-grid, I could have bought way more than 15 acres. But why? Why do I want to put myself in that stress, especially if I'm looking for just bug out, looking for just off-grid, and I know 15 acres will be completely sustainable? Make sure that you don't bite off more than you can chew. That also goes back to loans. Make sure you're not, hocking your whole life up to buy this land. Make sure you can afford it. If it's 25 or 30% more, if it costs you 25 to 30% of your budget a month to pay for the note, and that's not sustainable at least, maybe for 6 months, a year, then it's not affordable to you. If you are still paying for a home and then you purchase land, you better make sure that you can afford them both. If all of a sudden the crap hits the fan, you don't want the bank owning your property and then somebody repossessing it because you don't have the money to pay for it. So make wise decisions based on don't biting off more than you can chew. Make sure you have a down payment, and make sure you understand loans, and don't just jump into a property because it's quote unquote perfect. Now, these are all mistakes that most people made. I actually made some myself. So I'm trying to guide you into saying, you know what? Just be smart, be patient, and nothing is perfect. Now, it may be perfect to you. Let it be the paradise. You count the cost, you understand what you need to do there, and understand that everything has some cons, and yeah, there's some problems you have to work through. That's normal. That's owning property. But real estate, owning land is a great investment. But remember these things, so that way you will not make the major mistakes. Remember, when you're buying land, these mistakes cost thousands of dollars. These are not just dollar mistakes here. These are thousands of dollars of mistakes. And if you don't have piles of money, you need to count the cost and make sure you understand these things before you purchase land. Guys, I want you to build your homestead. I want you to build your off-grid dream. I want you to build your life of sustainability, but make sure you're doing it correctly, especially as someone as a prepper, homesteader, and sustainable living is something important to me. I want you to thrive. And the only way to thrive is to count your cost and make sure you don't make these mistakes. Guys, thank you for watching. Let me know what you think about this video below. Comment and tell us what you're doing. Tomorrow, if you comment on this video and give me a thumbs up, you will be entered into the drawing for tomorrow. All it needs is you subscribed, you give us a thumbs up, comment below, you'll be entered into the drawing for tomorrow, and it's a great gift. I can't wait to show it to you. Guys, thank you for watching. God bless. Happy homesteading, y'all.